Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this truth bomb riff dialogue with people that I'm referring to as the new Untouchables. I am one of the most blessed human beings walking around on the face of the earth to deal with the type of people and the firepower that we have that millions of people are looking for, but they just don't know. And what we're going to try to do moving forward, myself, is to personalize a little bit more drilled on who the people are that have been part of our ongoing panel discussions about all of the goings ons of what's happening, but I want to take the opportunity to get involved in a little bit more in detail with the folks that we're talking to. And in this particular week, and I'm recording this on April 4th, 2025, approximately 2 p.m. my time, but with the great Paul Pelletier. And what is so beautiful about this opportunity for me, Paul, and I know that people get a little bit embarrassed and, like if I gush over somebody, but look, I was on this massive journey. Okay. Now, just so you know, I do more than documentary film. I do more than just being a producer for the types of stuff that we've been engaged with. Like right now, I'm in the middle of a big family film that I'm doing right now that involves well-known superstars, celebrities. I'm doing what I call a soft horror film. I'm involved with a music project. I'm involved with some action sports projects. But, I've been doing that type of stuff for the last 20 years, Paul, 25 years prior to actually being forced into this journey to try to understand questions that I didn't have the answers to. And on that journey, I was unbelievably fortunate to meet the likes of you. And you are, and I say this unadulterated, and I don't care what anybody thinks, particularly, and I do care what you think, but I know that you don't, nobody likes to have adulation thrown at them. But the bottom line is, Paul, you're a superhero to me. Okay. And I want everybody to know it that comes in contact with this, especially some very well-known people that I'm feeding these things to, because right now the country is in absolute disarray, and people don't have. And you and I both know this and you're a hockey fan in addition to being a baseball fan, and I'm going to establish that in a moment. But you've been around the block, you've seen some things in your life, and just kind of as a starter, you can't fight effectively if someone blindsides you and you get off your game and you're on your heels. You don't know, like, so let's say someone turned off the lights and someone sucker punched you and they turn on the lights again, and you don't know who did it and what happened. You're disoriented. You don't have any context, right? So I say that to the audience out there because what we're constantly deluged with this 2 months into the Trump presidency, all things Elon Trump and Doge and everything that's happening to dismantle the federal government right before our eyes to do more damage than Osama bin Laden, quite frankly. And I say that with respect to the victims of 9/11, of course. But I mean, in a way that could just get inside our systems and blow this thing to smithereens. And for those of us who grew up believing in the idea that the law mattered, that the law could hold criminals to account, that there were professionals in the system that had the wherewithal to do what we saw in movies, and we just kind of expected that. But my journey simply to you, Paul, was that somebody turned off the lights and sucker punched me in 2008-9 to where I was completely disoriented, even though I had a career and a family and I was living the American dream and all sorts of stuff. And then all of a sudden I'm like, what the hell just happened? And that led me on this never ending odyssey to find people like you. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am, but to find people like you that have been fighting this battle for decades. And what people need to understand is guys like Paul have been in the trenches at the highest levels doing what they do to great success. And we have to reorient our national attention to the people who know how to fight these battles. And that's what this is in service of. So on that long, drawn out, and it's not even close to all of the things that you've done, but I hold you to the highest esteem, and I'm so grateful to be with you. But I want to turn this to you and just briefly, everybody comes from somewhere, Paul. You come from Massachusetts, you come from Boston, one of the coolest places on earth, one of the bastions of smart people throughout American history, and you're a sports fan. So what is the DNA that created who you are?
Well, first of all, thank you for doing what you do. This is what you do I think, is vitally important. And as far as I'm concerned, you need to reach a bigger audience. And
Yeah.
number one. Number two, I think you have be confused with a superhero named Paul Pelletier, who is an actual cartoonist, who's a very famous cartoonist who draws superheroes in comic books. So I think you've confused me with him,
Oh, I
but
love that.
I'll take that. I get whenever he draws whenever he comes out with a new comic book, my my LinkedIn and my Twitter presence goes wild because people think I'm him, but I'm not. But anyway,
That so
so
yeah.
so that's the real Paul Pelletier. But anyway, I'm like you said, I'm from south of Boston. The DNA in a lot of people in Massachusetts, I think, is a very hardy DNA, and I think that a lot of that is because it is a mix of immigrants and blue collar people, and I think that's you always have the blue bloods, but for the most part, when you grow up in New England and you're a townie like I was, you are just part of a blue collar family. Just to tell you a little bit, and Boston is neighborhood, so it's really a neighborhoody, ethnically separated city. It was when, at least when I was growing up. I didn't live in the city. I lived in the suburbs, way in the suburbs, small town. But that's sort of the DNA of people from New England, right? And that's the stock I come from. My parents are, at least my father's first generation. My grandparents all emigrated from, on both sides, emigrated from Canada, from Quebec. So they were French Canadians. They only married French Canadians. Hopefully, not relatives, but they married French Canadians. And when I sent my DNA to 23andMe, they told me I was 100% French Canadian from France, and I didn't have any other mix of anything else. I couldn't believe it, but that's what I was. So very, very much French and French Canadian heritage. I I had a blue collar father, see his manager. Terrific, terrific human being. I have a mother who bore my father 10 brothers and sisters. I come from
Wow.
a very, very large family. I think that to some degree that turns you into a fighter, because you have to fight for everything in a family of 11. And it was just a wonderful experience. He was a World War II veteran, different generation, obviously. Truly was the greatest generation. And that's sort of the way I grew up. I grew up working on a chicken farm, learning how to shovel chicken shit for $1 an hour. But with my brother, had a great time doing it. Paper route, altar boy, the whole experience you would expect someone to have growing up in a rural Massachusetts.
And Hardy stock is right, and I think back to like my upbringing. I've always been a rock and roll fan, but I've always been kind of a punk rock guy too, and a skater guy. And as you can see, I kind of have, my version of some of the things that come out of Boston. I think I've like a long lost cousin of Boston, but music like Aerosmith, and my favorite song of all time is Dream On, and I love the band Boston, and I love Dropkick Murphys, and I love all of that stuff that comes out of that world that you talked about. And by the way, in college, I lived with a bunch of guys from Boston and Chicago, but I got a real sense of how those guys operate, especially my friends from Southie. But the way I ended up meeting you was because I produced a television series called The Con, and you can find it for free at thecon.tv. And what The Con is the revelation of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that A, never ended, but B, nobody really fully understands, even though everybody says they understand it, but they don't understand it. And what I went, it was remarkable when I discovered you initially. It was because, of course, my involvement with William K. Black, and you guys had worked together and you'd been training people on anti-fraud. But what I came to learn was that you were at the highest levels of the Department of Justice, and your career was amazing in terms of what you had to engage by way of all the sophisticated money laundering, international drug routines with La Cosa Nostra, and those are just some of the high points. But can you give us a sense of, A, why you got in the law, but B, when you became a prosecutor and as you started going through this, can you kind of construct, sort of an umbrella, if you will, of how you move through this process to become the expert that you had to become in all of these things that the bad guys do when they lie, steal, and deceit, right? But to then you become somebody at the highest levels of, my friends, the Department of Justice of the United States. And there is no more important, as we see now, because of Pam Bondi and all things Trump at the moment. The Department of Justice serves a function. So, look, that's not a question. It's just an opportunity to ramp up, kind of what's important to you and what you did within your career, and try to bring those together.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to chew on there, but I'll try and sort of walk you through. First of all, it happened because of a lot of luck and people I met along the way that helped me become sort of who I am, including obviously my family. That, as we talked about earlier, that they sort of make you who you are. My father was a devout Catholic, as was my mom. That's why they had 10 kids. But the reality is that at some point in time along the way, I learned that Catholics were actually Christians, and Christianity was very treating people the way with dignity was sort of what I was taught all along my life, all along my career. But so a lot of hard work. I was a juvenile delinquent. I wanted to go to college, of course. Went to college. Probably the turning point for me was a couple of things. One, I became a cop, a part-time cop in my neighborhood, in my town. For most of my life, these people were my juvenile life. These cops were chasing me, and then at some point in time, I ended up getting hired by them.
Can I ask you to time out for 1 second? I just got to make the comment that everybody that I've ever known from Massachusetts either was a cop or they have a relation to somebody who was a cop.
Well, let me just tell you, a lot of my friends who are cops are that I grew up with. If it wasn't for being cops, they'd be in jail. But that's a different component. But anyway, so I got sort of a sense of a feel for the law, right and wrong, justice, doing that. But I guess sort of the turning point for me was after my second year of college, where my grades came in. I used to do a pretty good job of hiding my grades from my parents. And my grades came in, and my mom saw them and found them and looked at them and, said to me, "Look at Paul, is this," of course it was the usual C throughout. She says, why are you doing this? Why are you going to college if that's the best you can do? What do you want to do with your life? You're not applying yourself. You're a smart kid. What are you doing? So she really had a heart to heart with me. And at that point, I decided I got to do something with my life. And I got to make a decision as to whether I want to do something with my life. And at that point in time, I decided that I was going to apply myself. It was a little too late to go to Harvard Law School, but I ended up going to New England School of Law, which is a terrific law school in Boston. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor, but I wasn't quite sure yet. I thought I did. I was fortunate enough to be in a great law school that allowed me to thrive. I really felt home there. I really felt like academically it was where I needed to be and wanted to be. Did very well, was a managing editor. And trust me, I was a C and D student all throughout high school and in college. But in law school, I just felt at home. And I ended up being the managing editor of the Law Review. I ended up getting 2 judicial clerkships out of it, which were unbelievable. My last clerkship was with the Supreme Court of Colorado. It was just an awesome, lucky experience, of which I met real people who were leaders and thoughtful, and people who were devoted to justice. And it really helped guide my career path. And from that point on, I decided I wanted to go to the Department of Justice to be a prosecutor. I was very fortunate, again, lucky to get a job in the tax division of the Department of Justice way back when. And that's how I started right out of my clerkships, started a career as a prosecutor in the Department of Justice as a very young prosecutor, not like I am today.
Well, that's so fascinating that you bring a lot of things together, specifically the DNA, right? The family. And then, I love the humble sort of, boy, it gives me hope for my son. The humble, evolution, but you found your niche to go through that incredible process. But with the DNA and also the experience of being a cop and just having some common sense, but it just seems like for people like you, and when I think of characters, for example, in movies, in some of my favorite movies, it's like the guys who are the most effective at being able to take on organized crime are the guys that can think like people who came up in organized crime. And so you have one foot in the other, not to suggest anything. I'm just saying that, just well, to borrow the phrase of what we're talking about, the DNA of the culture. I mean, there's always criminals and there's always good guys, and maybe some guys go back and forth. But what you just mentioned, what I always found fascinating is the accounting side of it. Once you get inside the IRS and you understand accounting and you put all of those other hats on, boy,
Yeah,
it does give you the opportunity.
it sort of gave me an entry into financial crime, right?
Yeah.
And I was not a finance guy. I was not I started off as a math major, but quickly exited that major. But it ended up being an economic major.
Oh,
But so it gave me a real insight into sort of how agents, and I learned a ton from the agents I worked with, how agents pulled financial cases together, right? And it gave me, I tell people that when I'll give an example. Doing a search warrant and of a warehouse with tons of documents, and you're backing a truck up there and you're taking all the documents, and the FBI agent's response is, Jesus, where are we going to put this stuff? The DE agent's response is, when can we start arresting people? And the IRS agent's response is, when can I start looking at the documents? So that's sort of the attitude that I got brought up with, taking the documents and turning them into a living, breathing case. And I learned that from some terrific agents, but also not to be overwhelmed by the stuff. So I learned that, and just quite fortunately, at the time I was doing that, I was going to Miami to do financial cases down there from DC, where I was. And at the time, there were no money laundering laws. So what I learned to do was they would do what they call jeopardy assessments. They would immediately, within 24 hours of a seizure of money, file the person's tax returns for them and terminate their tax year, or file a jeopardy assessment, a termination assessment or jeopardy assessment, and end their tax year on that day. And then within 48 hours, they were entitled to a trial before a federal district court judge. So I had to prepare a financial case within 48 hours in order to effectively seize the money, which we would say that are going to be owed for the taxes that they surely weren't going to pay.
Interesting. Wow. Okay.
So that's how I sort of got my feet involved in that. And then I was, again, as luck would have it, I loved practicing down there in Miami, and they were looking for prosecutors at the time. And it was in the mid 80s. It was Miami Vice time. There was drugs falling out of the sky. It was just unbelievable time to be there. They asked me to be a prosecutor down there. I did. I was surrounded by some of the most terrific, unafraid prosecutors you've seen in your life. They taught me how I think my first year I had 12 big drug trials. And they just taught me how to not to be afraid. And the beauty of it was, we were trying so many cases, you couldn't care about losing, right? You learn how to bring the case, you learn how to take the evidence and narrow it down to focus for the jury. Obviously, drug cases are a little bit easier to win than financial fraud cases, but they all have their issues. And I learned how to make bigger and bigger cases, and how to use the evidence and the tools that the government now gave us, money laundering laws, minimum mandatories, no bail, all those laws, to take out an entire organization, to use the cooperators to take out an entire organization, and to follow their money, which was a terrific component of what I learned working for the tax division, to follow their money and seize their money wherever it might be. So it was a great environment. I was lucky to be there at the right time. I had some incredible supervisors in that office, and it was always, don't worry about losing. And nobody cared about losing. because you had to move on to the next case. I've seen when I went to get to main justice, if you try only one case every 5 years, you end up start worrying about whether you're going to win or lose the case, right? So didn't have time to worry about it. Did some incredible money laundering cases. Then we started going up the ladder, and I started prosecuting criminal defense attorneys who were laundering money and facilitating what drug traffickers were doing. And of course, that was a whole different ball of wax. But it was a incredible, rarefied atmosphere where agents and prosecutors, we hung out together, we lived together, we drank together, we partied together, and we tried cases together. It was just an incredible atmosphere.
Wow, you've given me so much to think about. So to move to the next phase of this, because my God, the DNA, the structure, the experience, but also the time. You had mentioned the '80s in Miami, and those of us who grew up at that time, we knew Miami Vice. We knew the songs from Jimmy Buffett. We knew the cocaine slash cowboys and all the money laundering, and then the real estate and all of those things that you were in the middle of. But what I heard, and I think back to, this incredible journey that I've been on, because see, when I grew up, I always knew that there was good guys and bad guys, right? And I knew that things can get a little complicated, but I never lost faith in the law, because I always thought that there was good guys that would do their work, whether win or lose. And then suddenly, because of my experience after the 2008 great financial crisis, and I'm going through all of these things, one of the guys I ended up discovering is a gentleman by the name of Jesse Eisinger, who wrote famously the Chicken Shit Club. And the Chicken Shit Club reveals how the Department of Justice ends up going into those sort of parallels that you had just described, where they would get so butt puckered, pardon the phrase, but to really try these cases because they weren't trying a boatload of them, and their careers might hang on one. And that leads us to these changes that take place in the 90s that involved, especially with big financial operations, where you get these statements of facts, and then you get these white shoe law firms that make these deals where there's no, nobody goes to prison. They end up with these, of course, gigantic settlements, which are a lot of times, PR. But moving that kind of into the next story, the next phase here, I want to underscore here, and this is what always blew my mind. Most people, because we've grown up with television shows, Law and Order, we've grown up with movies, we can see the difference, especially those of us who love Martin Scorsese films. There's good guys, there's bad guys, some guys are in between, it's great, it's this, it's that. But at the same time, the law always had this sort of function where we could depend on the bad guys going down when the evidence elicited it. Okay, so we had faith in our system. Just as a quick sidebar here, right now, what we're looking at is the death of law through a president, a criminal, lawless president. And however you want to go from this direction forward, but I want people to understand that Paul at this time in Miami was dealing with international criminals at the highest levels. And you were doing this on behalf of the United States of America. And you guys were figuring it out as you were going along, but you had the capacity to do it, and you did. Mm-hmm. So how do you bring that together based on your career and what you're seeing play out right in front of our eyes?
Well, a couple of things. So first of all, there are no good guys in Miami. So let's not get confused here. But no, in reality, my experience in the Department of Justice up to this time, and quite frankly, after I got to DC, was always the same. And it's sort of what you said. We were always the good guys. We always could put the white hat on. And I was always encouraged to do bigger cases, make a bigger impact, go after the cartel, take out the leader of the cartel, and then move on to the next one. And I can tell you that because of this encouragement and because of the lack of fear that I saw everywhere in Miami with prosecutors in terms of going after these people, we were able to make business so difficult for the cartels that they actually moved to Mexico because the cost of doing business in South Florida was too great. And they figured they could do it easier with going through Mexico. So I believed we were effective. And so I moved from there. They made me chief of economic crimes in Miami. I learned, to think big. The beauty about the Department of Justice, at least back then, was it was very organic. They would let you do whatever you could to be bigger, think bigger, be broader, make bigger cases. They constantly empowered me, my bosses, both in Main Justice and in Miami, to think big, right? And so when I was down there, I was made economic crimes chief. I had 20 people under my supervision. I interviewed all the agents in town, and I said, "What's the biggest FBI agents, all the law enforcement agents?" I said, "What's the biggest white collar crime problem in Miami that's not being addressed?" And repeatedly, at white collar crime, it was healthcare fraud. Billions and billions been seized. So I'm giving you this example just to show you my experience and why I felt like we were empowered and there was no stopping us. So I said to my U.S. attorney, "Look, I said, I have 20 people in my section. Well, I have one person doing healthcare fraud. It is the biggest problem in the district. Let me make half of my section tackle healthcare fraud. I want to make 10 people, baptize them as healthcare fraud prosecutors tomorrow." And he said, "Go for it." I mean, where does that happen? So I literally took 10 people and I said, "You are now healthcare fraud prosecutors. We are prosecuting healthcare fraud." They allowed me to build a healthcare fraud investigatory center in South Florida, none like it in America, all because it was organic. And they said, "Go for it. Whatever you need to tackle this problem, you have it." So that was my experience. Ultimately, after when Enron and the accounting fraud scandal started, I got invited to come up at DOJ and to sort of re-energize the fraud section to become more of a lean, mean fighting machine, and start tackling some of these accounting fraud cases, which we weren't tackling so much at the time. But again, Department of Justice empowered me to do that, whatever I wanted. And they created the President's Corporate Fraud Task Force to tackle. It was a huge problem. They tackled it. They tackled it just like the Bank Fraud Task Force in 1990. So my experience in the Department of Justice was what I watched TV programs about. You know,
Right.
the people getting on the buses and fighting the institutional racism in the South. It was always out there to tackle, do the right thing, make sure that you leave it better than when you got there, right? And so what I noticed changing, and this I hope answers your question about sort of the fear factor, when you're with the U.S. Attorney's Office, there's one political appointee, and that's the U.S. Attorney. And you know, they can be, because of politics, a little reticent to take risks. But when I got in the Department of Justice, and ultimately everybody above me was a political, everybody. So it's a completely different dynamic where people are, those political appointees, I used to call them tourists. They were there to check the boxes, right? And then go off and use that experience to get a bigger job. Now, when I first got to the Department of Justice, all those people, even though they were political, had been career. They had been career before that. And that's a different dynamic, but it changed over time. And ultimately, it changed to the point where almost everybody above me, excuse me.
Sure. Do you want me to hit pause?
No, I just hung up.
Okay.
I thought I did. So everybody above me was political, and the dynamic just changed. They weren't careers anymore. They were people that seemed to just be there for 2 to 3 years so that they could get a better job at a law firm. And that dynamic was completely different. And then what you talked about set in was fear. If we lose these cases, we're not going to be able to get that big job, right? So over time it changed, and certainly by Obama won, it changed drastically, where it made a difference in me being able to do the job that I thought I was hired to do. For the first time in my career, people were saying, "No, don't bring that case." don't do that. And that had never happened to me before.
Well, you light touched Enron in there. Oh my God, Enron! How freaking huge was Enron? But then, because of my knowledge of who you are and your, kindness to, unpack all of the pressing information and the questions that we were asked regarding the 2008 great financial crisis, but you were also the lead guy on AIG at the end. And so I don't want to go into all the details for the audience. Hopefully they'll discover our work. Hopefully they'll see some of these truth bomb riffs, but because we don't have a whole lot of time, can you please touchstone on maybe the difference in the methodology? But I mean, you're dealing with the biggest crises in our country's history that impact millions of people. And you're, again, the white hat, right? And you've got all of these abilities. And now you're telling me you're getting basically rug pulled from being the star quarterback that you are. Make me understand that.
Well, first of all, I wasn't looking to be the star quarterback, but I certainly wanted to do what I was hired to do. And so just to step back a bit, first of all, I want you and everyone to know that one of the I believe strongly, and I think you do as well, that one of the reasons why we're in the pickle we're in today is because of our failure to address the criminal aspects of the predatory lending and the valuations that public corporations were manipulating during the great financial crisis. So it's a pretty simple story, and that is when we tackled the Enron accounting scandals across the country, the entire department was led by the DAG at that time was Jim Comey, but it wasn't just Jim Comey. He brought everybody on board, and the mission for everybody in the President's Corporate Fraud Task Force: go out there, make big cases. We'll lead you. We'll fund you. We'll empower you. We'll give you whatever resources you need to bring these cases, right? It's that simple. And it takes leaders who have the courage to do that, remember? And remember, Ken Lay was probably one of George Bush's best friends, right, in Houston. But our mission was to go after these people, to get them. And I thought we, as an entity and as an institution, did a great job of that. I think we convicted over 900 banking executives or corporate executives, excuse me, in the C-suite during that time. So it's very simple. You marshal all your resources, you lead, and you make sure that your metrics are being made, right? And you have regular meetings across the country. This is how we're doing it. Well, and you train people to do that. We in the fraud section we stood up training sessions at the National Advocacy Center for all prosecutors and agents that teach prosecutors and agents how to tackle these cases. We taught them accounting. What is accounting? What's assets and liabilities? What does that all mean? And so how to dig in and how to get these cases. We spent a lot of time training prosecutors across the country to do that. That all evaporated, and it became once the Obama administration, and by the way, I'm a Democrat. Once the Obama administration came in, they lost that ability to lead. No longer were they having meetings. No longer were we training people. I mean, remember when they came into power, our economy was crashing. There was only one thing that needed to be tackled, and that was the great financial crisis. And in my experience in the Department of Justice, we were always there to fix that problem. And because of the lack of leadership, the lack of courage, they didn't give us the capacity to do it. And it was all because they were worried more about themselves and promoting themselves, these political appointees in the Department of Justice. They're worried about themselves than structuring a group. Very simple process: train people, empower them, and make them understand that winning or losing, go get the bad guy. That rug was pulled out from under us, and that's frankly why I quit at the Department of Justice.
Right. And to your point about being a Democrat, you also ran for Congress as a Democrat. And you also, now you're an adjunct professor and also in private practice, but at George Washington University, and you attend fraud conference. You're one of the apex experts in the United States for white collar fraud. You just mentioned Enron, 900 convictions. Okay. And so this point, even though we're running out of time, and I'm going to bring this because I want to end with a couple of personal kind of, antidotes, because you're just such a good guy. And I want people to understand this in the context of this whole thing. But what got me and why I'm so fortunate to, and I hope everybody understands at this stage of the game of this conversation, again, they turned off the lights on me as a citizen, as somebody who went through the 2008 great financial crisis that destroyed my life and millions of others eventually. And I did better than most, all things considered, because I made it my profession to go look into this stuff. But nothing made sense, right? Because I grew up with this understanding that there were guys like you out there that were the gold standard that would take on the bad guys, and you had the tools to do it. I saw it my whole life. Right. And then all of a sudden things were changing. And I'm like, wait, can this be? But I wasn't equipped with all of the stuff that I'm now equipped with after all this time period, engaging with you guys. And that's what I'm trying to get the American people to wrap their heads around. Because, again, what we've seen, and I'm going to try to do it this way. And if you can, try to leave us about 5 minutes to get out of this spot. Like the nature of Trump, right? We all see that there's Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, made possible, quite frankly, by the largesse of the United States government, which is insult to injury, considering what they're doing with Doge, which a lot of this stuff is illegal, that's dismantling the federal government. But where do they start? They start with the FBI. They start with the DOJ. They've got, Pam Bondi, who was a part of the great financial crisis, and by the way, her brother, which we showed in our work. But the long and the short of it is, because of Eric Holder's Department of Justice, a lot of people now are like, oh, Merrick Garland screwed up with the, just circling the noose around Trump because of the insurrection and Jack Smith and blah, blah, blah. So they finally understand, wait, there's a problem with DOJ, right? But wait a second, this didn't just happen, right? And so, again, we've got the tools, we know the law, you got the professionals like you. You're not, let's say you're semi-retired and some of these other things, but the bottom line is, we have a group of guys, and I will finish with this this question. This is a question, believe it or not. But William K. Black, when he went to investigate the S&Ls, I didn't realize this before. It was a recent discussion we had. He had $100 million. He had $100 million budget to go after this thing. Now, that was small in comparison to what they took down, right? It's the greatest return on investment, is taking down crime, right? But now we are with a lawless presidency run by billionaires that are above market forces and the law. And what are people doing? They're going all over the nation tomorrow to protest, but they don't know which way to orient. I'm just wondering, Paul, we know how to fix this. We just don't have the critical mass of millions of people going, hey, why don't we talk to Bill Black and Paul Pelletier and the other guys that Patrick Lovell's introducing to the country?
Well, let me just say this. One thing is sure, and has always been sort of a thing that drove me as a prosecutor, and that is corporate America will, if you let them, take advantage of every financial opportunity they can, whether it's on the side of the law or against the law, right? They will do that. And if you don't prosecute those corporate executives that commit crimes, they will do it again. They will do it again and again and again. It's like anything else. It's like, we talked about hockey. If you don't punch the cheater on the other team in the nose and fight him and be willing to fight him, he's going to continuously cheat and hurt your team and hurt your chance of winning. So you have to be willing to fight and punch them in the nose. So I go back to Trump. Trump University was a fraud from the beginning. Had the Department of Justice, and they should have, not prosecuted him civilly like they were, had they prosecuted him criminally. In 2014, when this case came into the office of the San Diego U.S. Attorney's Office, instead of treating this like a civil matter, he ripped people off, he lied, and they cheated. Had they prosecuted him then, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. But now, what we see is happening, he's dismantling all of the anti-corruption efforts within the Department of Justice. They'd already been dismantled partly by feckless leaders, but now he's actually stripping away the ability to go after oligarchs, the ability to go after foreign bribers. I mean, literally canceling the programs that are so important around the world to level the playing field, to keep people from stealing money from others. And so I wish I knew how to stop that, but right now we just have a law, like you said, we have a lawless Department of Justice that I just fear. One of the things, like I said earlier, you never want to do is leave the institution worse than you don't want to ding the reputation of the Department of Justice, because for so many years it had such a terrific reputation. But these people now, who would want to serve in the Department of Justice given what's going on there now? I mean, these prosecutors are getting before federal judges and lying to federal judges without compunction. And I've never seen anything like that before in my life. So it's not a good direction that we're going in, and I wish I had the answer.
Well, you do have the answer. The consequences because you didn't prosecute it. You said it yourself. And look, we got this situation because of everything we've been trying to tell the people for as long as I can remember. I mean, I've been involved with this damn thing for a long time, and more than I trust me. I wish I could move on and leave this behind. But like you, I mean, you come from, like you described it earlier in the dialogue, because of your family and the stock, the healthy, the vibrant stock of Massachusetts, where we had the Boston Tea Party, and this was the heartbeat of liberty, right? I mean, it's the idea is this matters. This matters. And people need to be inspired by people like you. They need to know that people like you exist, and they need to know that we can put this together if people aren't walking around like chickens with their head cut off and following false prophets that want to be able to say, this guy who's going to speak in platitudes and not tell you about all the crime and all the details of the crime, because you can't fix things if you don't know what the hell's going on. That's just how it goes. And so to that point, I want to finish off on a happier note, because we'll get into the next dialogue, and hopefully we can keep this going, because I think out of all the characters that we'll continue to introduce, you got a lot more to say, but people are going to fall in love with you, Paul, because I know that you are one of the greatest guys in this country. But I want everybody to know that Paul's not just this really healthy, prosecutor that rose to the highest levels of the Department of Justice and everything based on the career he laid out. He's also a movie star. And so there was this one moment, and I'll never forget this. And you got a great sense of humor, and you love sports. You're a Red Sox fan, and you're about as just salt of the earth as anybody I've ever met. But I'll never forget this, and I wanted to show you this picture. There was a pic there. I was snowboarding with Woody Harrelson. One time, him and my buddy lives next door to him in Hawaii or Maui, but we got a chance to go snowboarding. And I brought up this case, and I want everybody to understand. So the Farley brothers are the greatest comedic filmmakers of all time, and they've done everything from, There's Something About Mary to, the Three Stooges, and I could go on and on. But one of it,
Kingpin, Dumb and Dumber. Oh, keep going.
Yeah, but Kingpin was the best of the best of the best, starring Woody Harrelson. And you were one of the boys that got a chance to take out Munson's hand by putting it into in that classic piece, man. Where Roy Munson went from the golden boy and he got Munson for the rest of his life. And I was using all of those quotes when I went snowboarding with Woody, and I brought that up, by the way. And Woody was looking at me like, okay, dude, you know that I get that pretty much every airport I'm in. So let's just snowboard. How about that? But he was funny about it. But I want to say that in context to, look, I mean, in the Farley brothers, I mean, those of you out there with a sense of humor, like I grew up with Monty Python. I grew up with Saturday Night Live. I grew up with Mad Magazine. I grew up with Mel Brooks, for example. And if you can't have a sense of humor, at the same time, but there's a Bugs Bunny sort of way here. I mean, I wonder, as with the lifestyle of who you are and what you've done in your life. And by the way, last thing about the Farley brothers, or Chris Farley. I mean, he's doing what's it called? The soccer guy who I love on Apple TV, which is come on, man. What's his television show?
What's Peter's television show?
Yeah.
Loudermilk.
Yeah, no. Come on, man. The soccer guy. What am I talking about, man? On Apple TV, the head coach of the soccer team.
Oh, yeah. Good question.
I'm sorry, I caught you flat-footed. It's so funny that I watch it all the time, man. Ted Lasso. So Ted Lasso.
Yes, Ted Lasso.
I only say this with the last couple of minutes here. I mean, We can't feel despair, can we, Paul? We have to have a sense of humor to a degree, but at the same time, there's a fine line between, like a smile on your face, where it's like, when do you get pissed off, but when do you have to keep it light? Do you have any
Yep.
direction based on your experience?
Just first of all, I was fortunate enough to go to college with Peter Farrelly. I have no talent for movies. I just have a friend who produces movies. Number one, but humor is so invaluable. A sense of humor and an ability to disarm people with a sense of humor. And I think it's important. My parents and my father in particular was very funny guy who taught me everything I need to know about having a sense of humor and not taking everything too seriously. That being said, there's a big distinction between the seriousness which we enter our jobs and understand how serious what our job is, but approaching it with a sense of humor and some common sense. And I will tell you that as serious I was in what I did, it was a job, and I didn't take anything personally. And I didn't hold anything personally about a lot of the people I convicted. I mean, I still get Christmas cards from drug traffickers that I sentenced for over 50 years. And it's because you treat everybody with the dignity they deserve, right? With a sense of humor, not making fun of them, but with a sense of humor, but understanding the nature of your job. It really has helped serve me well in the Department of Justice. And I think if one thing about it, juries see you as a human being, right? And you have a lot more credibility if they see you as a human being. So, to the extent I have a sense of humor, I've tried to use it to my advantage every way I can.
Well, and Paul, on that note, and that's what I wanted to end up with, because that to me is America. That's what makes us different than, fascist or communist, like that would work for Stalin, that would be able to murder people. You got to have that Americana sort of bent.
Well, one of the things about this administration that is so bad is that first of all, they're the most unchristian people out there. And the way they treat people and the way they push people against each other and the way they create this ability of people to hate other people, to just hate other people, and for no reason at all other than because they're angry people, right? They're angry and they're looking for someone to take advantage of, or they're looking for some reason to justify their station in life. And blaming other people is what this administration has done, and it's really turned this country on its head. And I just hope we can come out of it.
Right. And, and the final point of that, there's a reason why America developed comic books like, Superman, and then Batman and Gotham, and Donald Trump is the Joker. And what we're looking at here is Batman and so forth, man. That's not the perfect connection.
No.
We're running out of time. So I'm going to say thank you. And hopefully we'll be able to do more of these. And I'll bid you adieu and have a wonderful weekend. And thank you so much for your time, Paul.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
All the best.